So, dear students, today I'm going to discuss To His Coy Mistress, one of the important poems of 17th century. This poem was written by Andrew Marvell, who is categorized in the group of metaphysical poets. Now, you know about metaphysical poetry. That metaphysical poetry was written during 17th century, but poets were forgotten in 18th century, 19th century, and then we have the revival of metaphysical poetry in 20th century, especially in the hands of T.S. Eliot. You must have studied the poetry of John Donne. Now, so Andrew Marvell, I have just told you that significant 17th century poet admired by 20th century critics, composed lyric poetry with which is sensuous, witty, elegant, and sometimes passionate. Now, his work is deeply, under the influence of John Donne and the metaphysical school. And he also shares some features with the tribe of Ben. Now, since he shared some features with the tribe of Ben, so we also group him as a cavalier, poet. Some of the representative poems of Andrew Marvell are To His Coy Mistress, The Garden, The Definition of Love, On a Drop of Dew, an Horatian ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland. Now, this poem, To His Coy Mistress, I have just told you, is a cavalier poem, and it was written either or during or just before the political English interregnum, which took place between 1649 to 1660. You know this period of political interregnum, and this poem was published posthumously in 1681. It is considered one of the finest poems of Andrew Marvell, and it is also recognized as the best carpe diem poem in English. I just told you that the date of its composition is not very clear, but we just guess that it may have been written in early 1650s. It's also the example of classic seduction poem. Now, when we look at the political context of this poem, we can just see that Marvell lived through a turbulent political period in England, during which the monarchy was briefly overthrown after a series of bloody civil wars between 1642 and 1651. You will be knowing about the execution of Charles I, then how Charles II flew from England, something like that. So it was a very turbulent period. He was a proponent of the short-lived Commonwealth period of England, which was established by victorious parliamentarians after the wars and became increasingly bitter after the monarchy was reinstated in 1660. I would like to suggest you that please read the literature or read the historical background of civil war, and also a Jacobean age, and also Restoration age. Then you will understand it. Andrew Marvell was actually he started writing during that political interregnum period from that 1649 to 1660, when the poem, it is guess the poem may have been written during that period. Now, the carpe diem theme is the most important feature of this poem. The poem does not present a scene in a specific place in which people interact. However, the young man and the young lady presumably live somewhere in England, perhaps in the northeastern England near the river Humber. I have just told you because the poet mentions river Humber in line 7 of the poem. The poet opens by telling his mistress that given all the time in the world, he would spend hundreds of years praising each part of her body, while she could spend hundreds of years refusing his advances. But he gently reminds her that their mortal days are not so abundant, and urges her to submit to his embraces before her beauty fades and they both die. This is actually the argument in the poem. The poet's argument is ingenuously constructed and presented, and the reader is left with both an amusing portrait of an impatient lover and a deeper sense of the evanescence of life. I have just told you that this poem is an example of carpe diem poem. I would like to focus on the term carpe diem before I proceed further. The term carpe diem means seize the day, or less literally, meaning is make the most out of the time we have. The phrase is often credited to the Roman poet Horace. It urges, if we keep this term in the context of this poem, so we find out that it urges a young woman to enjoy the pleasure of life before death claims her. The lover in this poem builds the logic of syllogism and concludes that the only way of courtship is enjoying life while ones are young. Indeed, the poem is an attempt to seduce the coy mistress. In the process, however, the speaker dwells with grotesque intensity on death itself. When we read the poem, we find that the idea of death actually takes over the poem, and it displaces the speaker's erotic energy and fills the poem with dread. It begins with the romantic idea, but later on the idea of death prevails over that, and the dread actually looms over that. The theme of Marvell's poem to His Coy Mistress is traditional, and it is based on the love time theme, and this is very often celebrated by great writers. The poet's idea about the mortality of the world and the transience of love are reflected here. The famous Latin poet Catullus, Ben Jonson's poem Song to Celia, Spenser in his sonnet number 75 from Amoreti, Shakespeare and a lot others celebrate the same kind of theme of mortality and the transience of life. Herrick's well-known lines may be quoted as a specific example of carpe diem theme. And the lines are, gather ye rose buds while ye may, then be not quiet but use your time. The poet's implication is that lovers must enjoy themselves in the prime of their youth in the world where time is ever fleeting. It also talks about the transience of life and the transient nature of time, love, sex, and mortality. are some of the important themes incorporated in the poem. I've just told you that this poem has syllogistic pattern. Now, syllogism is a form of logic in which a conclusion appears to be logically derived from two axiomatic propositions. It is a process in logic, a sort of deductive reasoning. It is a form of logic to deduce a conclusion from two given or assumed propositions. For example, I was just reading somewhere, so I found one example of syllogism. If one proposition is that airplanes contribute to global warming, and the second proposition is that global warming is dangerous, then the logical conclusion is that we should all try to reduce the number of flights we take. This is actually this example I have given in order to explain syllogism to you. Now we have one proposition, we have a second proposition, and then we have a conclusion. Let us discuss syllogism in the context of the poem. The poem is, constructed like a syllogism in the form of reasoning to deduce the main contention. The poem has three parts. The first part, comprising the first 20 lines, contains the first proposition. The next 12 lines constitute the second part, and it states the second proposition. The conclusion is drawn from these two propositions in the remaining lines. Now, the first verse paragraph, which begins with had we, is, as I have just told you, is 10 couplets long. Second begins with but, has 6. And the third, beginning with now therefore, has 7. So we have this kind of structure in the poem: if, but, and therefore. So this if, but, therefore is a kind of syllogistic pattern. So the logical form of the poem runs like if, but, therefore. Now we have actually the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. And there lies the crux of the carpe diem theme. The poem is in iambic tetrameter with 8 syllables, that is 4 feet per line. Each foot consists of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. The last syllable of line 1 rhymes with the last syllable of line 2. The last syllable of line 3 rhymes with the last syllable of line 4. And the last syllable of line 5 rhymes with the last syllable of line 6, and it goes on. Now, regarding these the items of the prosody, like iambic tetrameter, iambic pentameter, and all that, I have already uploaded one video on rhetoric and prosody. If your concepts are not clear, please watch that video which is uploaded on the channel. Now, this poem, as I have just told you, has many significant phrases, and many authors have borrowed the phrases which are used in the poem. So the phrase "world, enough and time," which is used in the first part of the poem, in the opening part of the poem, it forms the title of some important texts. The most famous is R.P. Warren's 1950 novel, World, Enough and Time, a romantic novel. a novel which is about a murder in early 19th century Kentucky. So R.P. Warren borrowed the title from the poem. The phrase, "there will be time," occurs repeatedly in a section of T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So we have actually many examples where the phrases from this particular text has been borrowed. We have also deserts of vast eternity is also used in the poem, and this the line "deserts of vast eternity" is used in the novel Orlando, a biography by Virginia Woolf, which was published in 1928. So, as I have very briefly told you about the poem "To His Coy Mistress," that what is the important theme, what is the pattern, and the way it moves. Now, in the following video lecture, I'll be analyzing the poem in quite detail, along with some, focusing on the important literary devices used by the poet in the poem. Thank you very much.